Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty fascinating. It's called The Collaborative. And they've put out this document. It's called Beyond Tomorrow, The Time Has Come. And, it's not just another one of those like policy papers. This one, it really goes deep into this fundamental question. How do we really help communities that are struggling, that are facing like some big challenges? And I think, there's always this debate about whether, enough is being spent on social programs or too much is being spent. And the collaborative kind of jumps into that conversation by saying, you know what, it's not really about just how much we spend, it's about how we spend it, right?
Yeah.
And they're looking for a way to create real lasting change in these underserved areas.
Yeah, and right away what really jumps out at you is how they define the problem. They're not really getting stuck in that whole how much should we spend
Yeah.
debate. They're kind of shifting the focus to how well are we spending
Yeah.
it, right? And that right there suggests that they've actually thought about all those different perspectives, all those arguments about social spending, and they're trying to find a way to be more effective, with the resources that are available.
Exactly. And as we unpack this more, I think it's really important to understand that their core mission here is to take these communities, right?
Yeah.
That are struggling, that are, maybe not doing as well, and transform them into, and I love how they phrase this, thriving socioeconomic engines of opportunity, stability, and hope. I mean, that's a bold vision.
It is. It is bold.
And the way they're proposing to do this is through this network of over a dozen different organizations. I mean, we're talking about groups that are focused on everything from like cutting edge AI, right,
Right.
to very practical things like mental health support, behavioral health support, life coaching, strategic planning. It's a really, really diverse group of people coming together.
And what's interesting to me is that um, they're not just saying, "Okay, we're going to have this big blanket program." You know what I mean? They're talking about these very specific, what they call solution modules, right?
Yeah.
And these modules are designed to be tailored, right, to the specific issues that a particular community might be facing.
Yeah.
So it's a much more targeted, much more adaptable way of trying to make an impact.
And they clearly believe that their approach has some key advantages. They keep talking about this holistic model.
Right.
It's driven by data. It's based on proven methods, and it has this flexibility to really craft, very, very specific strategies that are going to work for each individual community, right? They even mentioned something called Chart 1 in their document,
Art one, okay.
which kind of signals to me that, they really have this data-driven framework in place, and they're thinking about the long term here, not just some quick fix.
Right, right. And I think before we delve into, how they plan to implement all this, I think it's helpful to really lay out for the listener all of the specific challenges, right,
Yeah.
that these communities are actually facing,
Yeah.
because the document, it goes into some pretty significant detail about where the collaborative intends to focus their efforts.
Absolutely. And when they talk about these underserved communities,
Huh.
I mean, they're not being vague about it. They're literally listing out things like, crime rates, addiction, recidivism, which is that really disheartening cycle of people ending up back in the justice system. And then, of course, you have the really fundamental things like access to stable housing, right? Making sure people have jobs, making sure there's affordable childcare, having reliable transportation. These are basic needs.
Yeah, and they go beyond that too, though.
Yeah.
I mean, they're looking at things like food security, right?
Yeah.
Like making sure people have enough to eat. They're talking about wages, trying to
Mm.
improve wage levels. There's a focus on education and job training, and even something that's really interesting is they talk about promoting entrepreneurship, like encouraging people to start their own businesses.
Yeah, and that leads to this really interesting concept they mentioned, which is the dollar turnover rate. I'd never heard that term before.
Dollar turnover rate.
And it seems like what they're getting at is that they're not just looking at, individual well-being, but the economic health of the entire community, right?
Yeah.
How much money is actually circulating within the community itself.
Yeah.
And the list goes on. They talk about access to quality healthcare, and then they have this kind of broader category called life situation, which seems to encompass just, the general quality of life and having a support system in the community. Yeah, and I think it's really important to understand, all of these things are interconnected.
Right.
You can't really separate them out. right? I mean, if somebody's struggling with housing, that's going to impact their ability to find a job, right?
Of course.
And their mental health, their physical health. I mean, all of these things are really tied together. So by recognizing by identifying this whole spectrum of challenges, the collaborative is really demonstrating that they understand that this is, these are systemic issues.
Absolutely. So, okay, now that we've kind of gotten a clearer picture of who they're trying to help,
Yeah.
right, and the communities that they're targeting, let's zoom in on their stated mission and their vision. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but their mission is to revitalize these areas,
Mhm.
right, to turn them into these thriving socioeconomic engines. Again, I love that phrase. What stands out to you about that particular wording?
Well, the word engines, right?
I mean, that's not an accident. They're not just talking about, improving things a little bit. They're talking about creating systems, that are self-sustaining,
Right.
that can actually generate their own momentum
Mhm.
for growth and for opportunity. It's not just about providing aid. It's about empowering these communities
Yeah.
to kind of take control of their own destiny. And the fact that they use both socio and economic, right? It
Yeah.
really underscores that connection between social well-being,
Right.
right,
Yeah.
and having a healthy local economy.
Absolutely. And then their vision kind of builds on that mission, right? They're
Yeah.
they're not just aiming for better statistics or checking boxes on some kind of report.
Yeah.
They want to see real lasting change. And they specifically say that they want to measure this change in tangible outcomes and this is key in lives uplifted and communities reimagined.
Lines up listed. That's a powerful image.
It is. It's about making a real difference in people's lives, right?
Yeah.
Not just hitting some abstract target.
Yeah, and I think that phrase "communities reimagined," that's really important too,
Yeah.
because it suggests that they're not just looking at the surface level problems.
Mm.
They're actually thinking about the underlying structures,
Mhm.
right? The opportunities or sometimes the lack of opportunities
Yeah.
that exist within these communities. It's
Yeah.
about a fundamental transformation.
Right. So, okay. How do they actually propose to do this? I mean, this is a huge vision, right? This is a lot to take on. Well, their approach starts with what they call deep listening and discovery.
Deep listening.
Right. It's not about coming in with these preconceived solutions, right?
No, exactly. They emphasize that the first phase of their approach is all about really taking the time to understand the community,
Hmm.
and they talk about doing a comprehensive assessment of the community's history, its social dynamics, how the economy has evolved over the past 50 years. I mean, that's a lot of history.
It is.
And they're saying that, you can't really understand the problems of today, right?
Mhm.
Unless you understand how those problems developed over time.
Absolutely. And they're really committed to engaging with a lot of different people in the community, right? It's
Yeah.
not just talking to the leaders or the officials. It's talking to the residents themselves, talking to their families, talking to local leaders, community organizations, even law enforcement and government officials. I mean, it's really getting a 360-degree view of what the needs are, but also recognizing what are the strengths of this community? What are the things that they're already doing well? What do they aspire to? What's their vision for the future? It seems like a really big investment in building that foundation.
Yeah, it's a big upfront investment of time and resources, but it's so crucial
Right.
because if you don't really understand the context, right,
Right.
any strategy that you come up with is going to be, it's going to miss the mark. It's not going to be effective.
Yeah.
So this deep listening phase is really about making sure that they're starting from a place of deep understanding.
Mm.
And it also signals that they're committed to involving the community,
Yeah.
right, and in shaping its own future.
Right. That makes sense. So then we get to phase two, which is strategy. And this is where things get really interesting because this is where they bring in the technology. They transition to this data-driven strategy that's heavily reliant on AI, on artificial intelligence. And they make a point of saying that this is one of their key differentiators.
AI.
AI.
Yeah.
So how does that actually work in practical terms?
Well, think of the AI as this really powerful analytical tool,
Yeah.
right? It can take all of the information that they've gathered during that deep listening phase and it can synthesize it, right?
Yeah.
It can look for patterns and connections that a human might not even see, right?
Yeah.
It can analyze all of those different challenges and see how they're related to each other. And then that analysis informs the development of of a strategic roadmap, right? A plan for how to move forward.
Right. And it's not just a static plan. I mean,
Okay.
they build this roadmap around specific performance metrics and phased goals, which means they can actually track their progress. They can see what's working, they can see what's not working, and they can adjust their strategy as needed.
Right.
And the AI also helps them just to run things more efficiently. It can help with decision making, it can track progress in real time,
Hmm.
and it can also help them to identify areas where they might be able to be more innovative, right?
Yeah, and what's really exciting about this is the potential, right?
Right.
For the AI to reveal things that we might not see. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like maybe there's a connection between, you know, a, a, a particular type of crime
Right.
and a lack of access to mental health services,
Right.
and that's something that a human analyst might not even notice, but the AI, because it can process so much data, it can find those hidden connections,
Yeah.
and that can lead to more effective interventions.
Yeah, and they even go so far as to say in the document, this is more than a plan. It's a movement grounded in precision, partnership, and purpose. So it's that combination of a data-driven approach, right?
Mm.
With a really clear sense of mission and a collaborative spirit. I mean, that seems to be at the heart of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize that word partnership, right?
Yeah.
Because it suggests that they're not just coming in and saying, okay, here's the solution.
Right.
They're coming in and saying, okay, let's work together.
Let's figure out how to solve these problems together.
Right. So, okay, let's dig into some of the specific advantages that they list, right?
Right.
For their what they call their transformative community platform.
Okay.
So the first one, and they actually call this a key differentiator, is AI-powered insights. We've already touched on this a little bit, but what's the real benefit here?
Well, it's not just about looking at past data.
Right.
It's about forecasting.
Right.
It's about using AI to predict, what might happen in the future. So for example, if the AI sees that, unemployment is rising in a particular area
Right.
and housing instability is increasing,
Yeah.
and maybe there's a history of crime in that area, it might say, okay, we need to intervene early.
Right.
We need to put some resources into this community now to prevent those problems from getting worse.
Right.
So it's about being proactive,
Right.
right? Not just reactive. And the other thing is that it's tailored.
So the AI can actually develop specific support strategies
Right.
that are designed for the unique needs of that community or even for individual people.
Okay, so that leads into the next advantage that they list, which is preventative intervention strategies. I mean, this sounds like it's a direct result of having those AI-powered insights, right?
Right, right. It's about shifting from a reactive approach to a preventative approach.
Right.
So instead of waiting for problems to become crises, right? They're using the AI to identify those early warning signs,
Mhm.
right? And then they can deploy resources, they can provide support before things escalate.
Yeah.
And that not only has the potential to be more effective, right?
Right.
But it could also be more cost effective in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Then they talk about scalable and customizable architecture. And this suggests to me that, they've built this platform with flexibility in mind.
Exactly. They're not saying, okay, this is a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
They're saying, look, every community is different. Every population is different.
Yep.
And we need to be able to adapt our approach, to fit those specific circumstances.
Right.
And the fact that they've built a platform that can be scaled up, that can be customized, that means they can work locally, they can work nationally, they can work with a lot of different partners.
Right.
And that's really important for achieving broad impact.
Okay. So data-driven decision-making, another key advantage that they highlight. How does this actually empower, the people on the ground, the people who are working in these communities?
Well, it gives them information.
Right.
You give them data, right?
Yeah.
And it gives them that data in real time. So they can actually see, okay, what's happening right now?
Right.
Where are the needs
Yeah.
the greatest?
Right.
Are the programs that we're implementing actually having an impact?
Right.
And that allows them to make more informed decisions about how to allocate resources, how to adjust their strategies, and it also creates a level of transparency and accountability,
Right.
which can be really important for building trust, for building collaboration among all the different stakeholders who are involved in these revitalization efforts.
Absolutely. Advantage number 5, holistic community solutions. again, we talked about this earlier, this idea that these problems are all interconnected.
Right. You can't just focus on one thing.
Right.
You have to look at the whole system. So they're talking about integrating services.
Right.
Right. So mental health and behavioral health services, workforce development, crime prevention, community revitalization, all of those things need to be working together
Right.
because they're all part of the same picture.
Right. And then we get to another key differentiator that I think is particularly interesting because it's really about empowering individuals. And this is what they call the micropreneur incubator. Tell us more about that.
So this is about building economic strength
Right.
from within the community.
Right.
And they do that by supporting small businesses, right? Helping people start their own businesses, helping them grow their businesses. And the idea is that if you can increase local entrepreneurship, right, you can actually increase the dollar turnover rate.
The dollar turnover rate.
That's how many times a dollar circulates within a local economy before it leaves the area. So if you can encourage people to shop locally, to support local businesses, that money stays in the community longer.
Right.
And it has a bigger impact.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's about building that economic self-sufficiency, right? Within the community itself. Okay, so then the next advantage they highlight is workforce readiness and job placement. And this is something that we see in a lot of, community development programs, but the collaborative seems to have a really specific focus on long-term success.
Yeah, they're not just about getting people jobs.
Right.
They're about helping them keep those jobs.
Right.
And to build a career. So they provide training, they provide coaching, they help with resumes, all the typical job placement services. But what's unique is that they also offer ongoing support,
Right.
for up to 2 years after someone is placed in a job.
Right.
So that person has somebody that they can turn to, right?
Yep.
They have support, they have guidance as they're navigating that new job, as they're trying to build a career.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, and then another key differentiator they highlight is boots on the ground integration. And I love this because this seems like the really human element, right?
Oh,
What
right.
is otherwise this, very technologically advanced approach.
Yeah, because technology can't do everything.
Right.
You need people, you need human connection.
Right.
So they deploy these trained individuals, right? And these are often people who have lived experience in these communities.
Right.
So they understand the challenges. And their role is to build trust, to build relationships, to provide support, to do counseling, to actually be there on the ground working with people.
Right.
And they also talk about these individuals being involved in crime intervention efforts, which I think is really interesting.
Right.
Because it's about trying to prevent problems before they escalate.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, they address the whole question of, return on community investment, or ROI.
ROI.
So how do they define success? How do they actually measure the impact of their efforts?
Well, they focus on quantifiable results. Right. So they look at things like recidivism rates.
Yeah.
Are fewer people ending up back in the justice system? They look at employment levels.
Yeah.
Are more people finding jobs and keeping those jobs? They look at business activity. Are more businesses opening up? Are those businesses succeeding? They also look at things like public service costs. Are they able to reduce the cost of providing services? And they look at the tax base. Is the local tax base expanding? So it's about demonstrating that their approach is not only effective,
Right.
but it's also efficient.
Right.
It's a good investment.
So it's about proving the concept, right?
Exactly.
Not just with anecdotes, but with real data. So to kind of sum this all up, the collaborative is putting forward this really comprehensive strategy for revitalizing these underserved communities. It's a model that's, it's very data driven, it's AI powered, but it's also very community focused, right?
Yeah.
It's about tailoring solutions to the specific needs of each community. And it's about thinking long term. It's about sustainability. They're trying to address this whole issue of social spending in a really, really thoughtful way. And they're looking for ways to be more effective, to really uplift individuals and to build thriving communities.
Yeah, and I think the key takeaways here are data, right?
Yeah.
Using data to drive their strategies. They're really emphasizing proactive interventions, trying to get ahead of the problems. And they're really focused on building those self-sustaining local economies. And I think that combination of sophisticated technology
Right.
with that human element, those boots on the ground, that's a really powerful combination.
Absolutely. So I guess as we wrap this up, the big question for you, the listener, is, considering all of the challenges, right, that these communities are facing and how ambitious this initiative is, what do you think is going to be the most critical factor?
Yeah, what's going to make the difference?
What's going to make the difference? Is it going to be those AI insights, right? Is it going to be the human connection? Is it going to be that focus on economic empowerment? I mean, there's a lot to consider here, and I hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks for joining us.